Dibiase and Hacksaw Jim Duggan. Okay, so what I'm going to do is going to ask a few of my own questions and put stuff to them, and then we will open the floor to yourselves. So, guys, I know over the past few months we've lost a few of your good friends. Most recently, Roddy Piper. Have you got any memories that you'd like to share with everyone?
Thanks. Obviously, I'm heartbroken with Piper's passing. It shocked everybody, but I know Pipe would be one of the guys who say, "Hey, the show's got to go on." A little bit I know the guy, so I'll relate to, I don't know if any of you folks had the opportunity to watch Legend House. They were expecting a drama, they got a comedy out of that reality show, but when I got there, they said, "Well, you have to have a roommate." And I'm like, "Well, I haven't had a roommate since college." You know, I'm thinking, maybe Hillbilly Jim, you know, maybe Jimmy Hart. And they go, "And you're rooming with Piper." I'm like, "Piper?" I didn't know the guy, you know. So the first 2 days, we just kind of eyeballed each other like, "Yeah, how you doing, brother?" "I'm doing good, how about you?" You know, but they called it the bromance. Our relationship really grew over those 5 weeks. And the advantage of living with Piper is you can get away with anything and blame it on Piper. So much stuff they didn't show on the actual airing of Legend House, but one night, that first week we're there, I thought it was kind of quiet. So I'm like, well, I think I'll throw all the pool furniture in the pool. A big whodunit the next morning, you know. So first I gotta wait for everybody to go to sleep. And I jump up and I can't just throw the pool furniture in the pool because it'll splash and wake people up. So piece by piece I'm dropping the pool furniture in the pool. And, you know, I sleep naked out, you know. So I'm out there naked, but I gotta, and all of a sudden I see a flashlight coming. Oh geez, here comes a night watchman, right? I'm up against a palm tree, my heart's pounding like Midnight Express, you know. I'm waiting for this guy to go by, but he didn't see me. So I get all the pool furniture in the pool. Next morning I wake up, I go in the kitchen, and Pat Patterson's in there with Gene Okerlund and Jimmy Hart. Pat's like, "Somebody really screwed up. We're going to get us thrown out of this, we're going to mess up Legend House. They threw all the pool furniture in the pool." Well, Piper wasn't in his bed last night. "Oh, that Piper!" You get away with anything with Piper. And, one night, everybody else would go to bed early except me and Pipe. Jimmy Hart called us the night crawlers, you know. And this one night, I'm sitting in the kitchen eating. Imagine that. No story there. And I can see the night producer. He's running from one end of the house to the other. He's all upset, you know. Finally, he runs into me. His eyes are huge, and he's like, "Piper's in the desert." Because we're out in the middle of the desert, Palm Springs, California. I'm like, "It's okay, you know, you just got to get some air, you'll be okay." The kid goes, "Not on my watch." You know? So for then, next 5 weeks, the poor guy was called My Watch. You know, and, "Hey, My Watch, come here, man." Had a great fun with Pipe, and of course, you know, at WrestleMania this April, my family was there. His family our families are close, and of course, it was a shock. I was, like many of y'all, heartbroken. Yeah.
Jim, I'm still trying to picture you putting that furniture in a pool naked.
That was the biggest part of the story.
No comment. I loved Roddy too. And it's funny, back before the WWF days, or WWF as we were known, when wrestling was regional all over the United States, we had crossed each other's path, but we never really had an opportunity to work together or really get to know each other. But there was always a mutual respect. And so the first time I actually had the chance to work with Roddy, wrestling-wise, actually, I had to pull a WrestleMania match out of Virgil. And I needed a little help, so anyway, Roddy was at ringside, kind of like supposed to be, coaching Virgil. The whole angle, as we called it, was really about what was going to go forward from WrestleMania, and that was an angle between me and Roddy. And so we went all over the place and having these matches, and what I would do is they'd introduce me, and then they'd introduce Roddy, and I would do the thing. Look, I'm the $1 million. I don't really feel like sweating tonight. And so, Hot Rod, here's $300, pal. I said, take the money, go out, buy yourself a nice meal, have a bottle of wine, and that'd be a lot better, because I know you don't want to be embarrassed in front of all these people tonight by me, right? So what do you say? Take the money. And so he kind of looks at me, and then he kind of looks at the people, and I look away. Like, yeah, I got him. And then when I turn back, he nails me. Boom, and the money flies up in the air. He grabs the money, rolls it out of the ring, and he goes around the ring, and he gives all the money to the people at ringside. That's the way we started this match. So we've been doing this for a week or so, and we're out in California. I have a sister that lives near San Francisco. It's only about an 80-mile ride from there to Sacramento. We're in Sacramento, so my wife is with me now. My wife has gone to the shows before, but she sits in the back or wherever. They put my wife and my sister on the second row of ringside. And so I said, hey, Hot Rod, I said, the gimmick tonight, I said, my wife and sister are sitting on the second row. I said, when you roll out, put the money in their hands. We'll all go out and have a good time. And so we do the spot. He hits me. He grabs the money. He rolls out. He goes and grabs my wife's hand, opens her hand, and plants it in her hand, puts her other hand on top of it, goes back in the ring. We have our match. We get back in the back like we're all happy. My wife looks at me and goes, don't you ever do that to me again. I said, why? She goes, as soon as he turned around, he says, all the fans, they were like piranha. They were just kind of coming over the top and reaching and grabbing it. And she says, I can hardly breathe, so I just let it go. So we tried. Let it go. So, that was one of the funny things that happened with me and Roddy. But the last time I got to see him, we were at a Comic-Con in Houston, Texas, and it's just sad. I mean, the guy, 2 years ago he beat cancer, and actually we're all the same age. Roddy was 61 years old, and that's much too young to go, and very much missed, and absolutely one of a kind. My gosh, that's why my head's so big, No. But
that's not the reason, Ted.
So I tell him, I said, okay, Jim, it's time to get the juice. Big guy, ain't afraid of nothing except that balloon.
I can't understand. I'm afraid to cut myself with a razor blade. Jeez. I cannot don't understand. Second generation guy.
Yeah.
So Ric Flair, he looks in the mirror, he just gets juice for something. There's something to do.
Yeah. So Jim goes down and he covers up and he does the thing. He says, okay, I said, just a little more. So he does it again. Okay, just a little more. He does it again. It's okay, so just a little more. He goes, hey, wait a minute.
I'm like ankle deep in blood. Get some more, Duggan, get some more. Okay, that's true.
It's kind of the way we tease each other.
Yeah, of course, then the other one, now our heads are Hamburg, and we've been wrestling each other. And we're in a small little show in the afternoon. There's very few people there. And Ernie Ladd, the big cat, was the producer of the show. He comes in, he goes, okay, double juice tonight. Pat and I look at each other, we're like, Ernie. And of course, wrestlers, if you got something that hurts, they go, is that still sore? And of course, it opens up and starts bleeding on the airplane or wherever you're at. But anyway, like, come on, Ernie, no juice tonight. We don't need it, And the big cat's like, okay, no juice tonight. We're like, great. So technically, we go out, we had this standard spot, the 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, ass bump. I give him an ass bump, so it's like 1, 2, 1, boom. I hit Teddy in the throat, it's like I hit him in the nose, it's like I cut his throat. It's just going pouring out of his nose. I'm like,
Yeah, I just heard that. I said, "Look, are you happy now? Are you happy?" Yeah. Oh my gosh.
that was right after I did it again.
Yeah. Oops. Right.
My mistake, Ted.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Then we did, but we had a lot of it. And
Then we also worked in the WW.
we did. There were people don't realize how many miles we traveled. You know, the not so glamorous life of professional wrestling. I mean, we averaged weekly in the Mid-South territory between 2,500 to 3,000 miles. It was just incredible, the amount of driving. So sometimes we just had to do, we would just, do things to amuse ourselves. Like in summertime, I remember one time we, I don't know, we were on some back road going somewhere, and we stopped in that, a bunch of fireworks and went way down the road and pulled over to the side of the road. There's nobody on the highway but us. It's 3 o'clock in the morning, so the next 5 cars coming are going to be all wrestlers. So we got these Roman candles and lit them up on both sides of the road. And as the boys came by, we're flying, stupid stuff that entertained.
That was you?
Yeah. But then there was the trip that we made from Houston.
Was that where you pushed the door open and, that was a different story.
Yeah.
This one, though, Ted.
Yeah, you want to tell that story? I mean, this is, can we tell that story? No. Okay. All right, we will tell that story.
Yeah, if you tell that one, I tell the other one.
Oh, no.
How about Andre?
Oh my gosh. Andre the Giant. 7 feet 4 inches tall. His announced weight when he was in shape was 450 pounds. I promise you, like in those last few years in the WWF, he was 500 pounds. And I mean, imagine Andre, post WrestleMania 4, I traveled with him for several months because it was like me and Andre against Hogan and Savage.
That's when he cheated outside the ropes and punched me at WrestleMania. I remember that, Dibiase.
Yeah, well, everybody's got a price. Imagine Andre, a guy the size of Andre, when you're that big, it's hard to get comfortable anywhere, right? And the last thing you want to be is cramped. So we make this trip to Japan. Now it's a 14-hour flight from just about anywhere in the U.S. to Tokyo. And so 14 hours on the plane, even sitting in first class, in the first class seat, Andre's not that comfortable. Not to mention the fact that, he's got to go 14 hours without relieving himself. Which means he had to just get all fluids out of his body before he got on the plane because there's no way he could get on a bathroom in an airplane. So we get to Tokyo, we get our bags, and then it's another hour on a bus into the hotel. We drop our bags, we're all going to go out and have something to eat, and then you try to stay awake as late as you can that first night because of the time difference. And so everybody drops their bags, I go hit the button on the elevator, the door opens and there's Andre. Hey boss. Hey Andre. So the elevator starts down. It's like every other floor it stops and people get on and people get on. Now gang, let me tell you something. What you and I would consider a full elevator, not in Japan. The whole country is about the size of the state of California. 3/4 of it is uninhabitable mountains. So you're looking at a landmass about 1/4 of the size of California, and the population's half that of the United States. That's stacking them up. So, they literally, at the train station in Tokyo, they have people they pay them to shove people on the trains. It's unreal. And again, the big man doesn't like to be crowded. So these people just keep getting on. He reaches over and taps me, and I looked up at him and he winks. I said, okay, something's gonna happen, right? And there's no nice way to say this, but the next sound that you heard was, in my estimation, not only the loudest, but the longest fart in history. The big man just lets one rip, and I'm staring at the door, I'm biting a hole in my lip, and I'm thinking, I know he's the giant, but how could anybody possibly have that much air inside of him? And all I could was picture was the poor little Japanese guy that's directly behind him, right at blood level, taking it full force. Needless to say, when that door opened, it was like the Exodus. They were falling over each other trying to get out. And all you could hear was, oh, 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 oh. They won't crowd the giant again, will they? Funniest thing I ever saw in my life.
The giant definitely, had a unique aroma. He was such a big guy, it was hard to be hygienic, he had trouble fitting in the bathrooms and the showers and stuff like that. But I actually owe a lot to Andre because he elevated me from a mid-card guy to a main event guy at the WWF. He's out there, he challenged, I challenge anyone. Of course, if there's any giant in wrestling, they're like, Duggan, come here, get your 2x4. I wrestle every giant there is, so I run down there and I got my chin on Andre's belly, like, I'm not afraid of you. And he kind of laughs at me, and he goes to grab me, and his thumb hits my lip, and just about tears my lip off. It just falls right down. So now blood is cascading down my chest, and Andre's got me by the throat, he chokes me down, he chokes me down. And finally I feel around, boom, I got my 2x4. I hit Andre with a 2x4, he goes down like a huge redwood. The WWF goes off the air, and he's standing over Andre the Giant, covered in blood. And he did that favor for me and elevated me to a main event level. So after that, like Ted says, when you would shoot an angle, you would wrestle each other for 50, 60, 70 days straight at least. And so I'd wrestle Andre all this time, and of course, like I said, he was not the most hygienic guy. He didn't wash his gear an awful lot, There's always great airport security, like, I have to check your bag. I'm like, help yourself.
Yeah, sometimes I think it was a rib. My guys rib each other.
But anyway, we'd do this spot, and Andre, he would say, step closer. I took a couple baby steps, and he'd go like, closer. And he'd grab me by the hair, and he wore that singlet. He grabbed the singlet around my throat, and he choked me with it every night. So this one night, he's a little more inebriated than usual. He's like, closer. And I'm like, oh, gee. So I stepped in, he grabs me by the hair, and he pulls me in, he goes to wrap it around my throat. But instead of going around my throat, it goes like this. And now he starts choking me. He's squeezing all that giant juice out of his gear, And I was about 300 pounds, and I'm fighting as hard as I could ever fight in my life. And Andre's going, whoa. He had a unique sense of humor. Another quick one, Teddy. With guys with long hair. He used to like to knock you down, like Jake Roberts, myself, he'd knock you down, your head land, and your hair would go down. He'd step on either side of your head, he'd step on your hair, and then he'd grab your arms and pick you up. So he'd be pulling your hair by picking up by your arms. And Jake Roberts used to come back to the dressing room going, I hate when he does that. I hate when he does that. But what are you going to do as a giant, right?
I was at ringside for a few of those with Jake laying there, and Andre's picking him up, and Jake's going, ah.
I can't say no. I was squealing too.
Oh, yeah. But the things we do to amuse ourselves,
But it's a funny story. You got any rip stories?
Oh gosh. Again, always to entertain each other, that we pull ribs on guys. So again, I'm in a bar with Andre. And I'm going to go back before this one. When I first met Andre, I was still in college playing football. And Andre came to Amarillo, Texas. It was the Amarillo territory run by the Funk family. And so, for whatever reason, nobody was available that night after the show. But they said, Ted, would you take Andre out? And I said, yeah, sure. So I took him to like in one of the local college spots where all the college kids went to party. So we sit down and the girl comes up to take our order and Andre looks at her and says, "Do you have a trash can?" And she says, "Yeah, we got several of them." She says, "You empty trash can, fill it with beer and ice." And she looked at me like, and I said, "Do it." And she looked at me literally, I mean, a trash can this big, right? You know, with 2 or 3 cases of beer in it on ice, and we just sat there and, you know, got inebriated. And so, fast forward, now I'm in the business, and I think we were in Boston, and you know, and again, on that tour post WrestleMania 4, which was my first WrestleMania, in reality, you know, I had a pretty good name in the business already, but that rub with Andre, the whole WrestleMania thing, WrestleMania 4, also elevated me.
That's where you cheated.
And so, and I think we were in Boston, and so we're sitting in the bar, and Andre says, "I'm going to make you a bet." And he said, "If I win," or he said, whoever loses has to buy a round for the house, everybody. And I said, "Okay, what's the deal?" He said, "Bartender." So he had the bartender bring 5 like beer glasses, like the big beer glasses, like sitting on your table, and 5 shot glasses. And he said, "Fill mine with beer." And he says, "Anything you want to drink, water, beer, whiskey, I don't care." And I said, "So what's the deal?" And he says, "I bet that I can finish my 5 glasses of beer before you can finish those 5 shots." And I'm going, there's got to be something to this, but I have to find out. And so I got 5 shots of, I don't know what it was. I wish it was a little stiffer now. So, and he says, "Oh, and no monkey business, you know." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "You know, no, you know, you can't move my glass. You don't touch my glass, I don't touch your glass." "Oh, okay." So the bartender says, "Go." And so Andre inhales this beer, and I got like 3 shots down. He simply took the beer glass, turned it upside down, turned it over, and set it over my last shot. I couldn't touch his glass. So he just sat there and very calmly drank the other 3 beers. Something for all of you to remember the next time you want to play a joke on somebody.
Ultimate Warrior joke. It wasn't really a joke, a little rib. You know, the Warrior wasn't the most personal guy in the world, because he was one of the great wrestlers that the WWF ever had. But anyway, we were in a big battle royal. And back then, they didn't film everything. You know, of course, now everything you do is on camera, not just in the ring, but all over the world is on camera. But anyway, it's me, Boss Man, and Kurt Hennig. Me and Boss Man, we push the Ultimate Warrior in the corner, and we're working him over pretty good. Kurt Hennig's on the apron. He rolls on the apron, and he reaches up and he ties. The Warrior had those nylon strings hanging on him all the time. So he ties a nylon string from his bicep onto the top rope. So me and Boss Man, boom, we split and leave. So the Warrior's like, I break. It's nylon. It goes around his arm. Now he's in the corner. Oh! Chief Jay Strongbow had to come down with a jackknife and cut him loose. So me, Boss Man, and Kurt got a free trip up to Stamford, Connecticut for a little attitude adjustment of what to do in the ring.
Yeah, the ribs that we played on each other. I had come back from somewhere on a trip overseas, and because of the time difference, anytime I go overseas, I'll go to my doctor and I will get a prescription of sleeping pills to fight the jet lag. And so we came back from a show, and I go up and drop my back. Henning, you know, he's there, and he says, "Ted," he says, "you know, you have a couple of sleeping pills." He says, "No, I really need it." And I said, "Yeah, sure." So I came back downstairs, and I just grabbed the bottle, and so when I came downstairs, you know, I went in and I said, Kurt, and I threw the bottle to him and I said, I gotta go to the restroom, I'll be right back. So I go to the restroom, I come back, you know, and he says, thanks very much. He hands me back the bottle, you know, and he said, hey, I got you a beer. So we're sitting there and we're drinking a beer, you know, and then I get another beer, and about halfway through that second beer, it hit me. I said, man, what is wrong with me? And I can hardly keep my eyes open, and I went, oh no. And I looked at Eddie, and you said that shit-eating grin on his face. You better go to bed. I go, yeah, thanks a lot, pal. One of the stories.
Owen Hart story that actually Brett, I knew Brett real well. I know Brett real well. I didn't know Owen that well, but Brett told this story at Owen's funeral. I'm down in the south somewhere in the hotel room. I called the front desk and I said, excuse me, I said, is there a gym close by? And the guy had to answer the phone. He goes, you one of those wrestlers? I said, yes, sir. He says, you got a phone book in your room? I said, yeah. He goes, why don't you look it up? I'm like, hey, I said, you know, I spent some money at this hotel. I just want some common courtesy. He said, I'm trying to take care of you wrestlers. If you've got a problem, you come down here. I'm like, well, okay, you bet your butt I'll be down there, buddy, you know. So I'm getting dressed, I slam the phone down, now the phone rings, I pick it back up, and it's the guy from the front desk. He goes, I'm sorry, sir, I'm sorry. He says, it wasn't me, it was one of those wrestler guys down there. I said, well, who was it? So the guy looks at Owen, he goes, what's your name? Owen goes, Jim Powers. He goes, who's Jim Powers? So that night, let me tell you something, Powers, I don't like to be ripped. Jim's like, what the hell, buddy?
Yeah. You know, the business is, you know, it's a unique thing. It's kind of like, I tell people all the time, I say, you know, like people, well, what do you do for a living? I run around in spandex and then people don't have the chairs. What do you do, pal? You know, it's an odd job. It's not like a normal job. But, and people ask me, well, how did I get interested in wrestling? And the answer to the question was my dad, actually my stepfather. My biological parents divorced when I was 2, and my mother remarried when I was 5. And my stepfather, Mike Dibiase, whose wrestling name was Iron Mike. But he was not only a professional wrestler, he was like a national amateur champion, an AAU national amateur wrestling champion, wrestling for the U.S. Navy in 1946. Then he went to Nebraska, storied career. I didn't know any of that stuff when I was 5. I just knew that this man came into my life and showed me that love and became that dad. And I was that kid who grew up wanting to be just like my dad. So I, you know, all my life, I wanted to play football and I wanted to wrestle. You know, I had dreams of the NFL too. And when I got to the college level, I got a scholarship to college. And I remember one day the coach looked at me and he said, Dibiase, we're going to have to start timing you with a sundial. I don't think I'll be going to the NFL, you know, when I made it through college, and I started right out of West Texas. It's funny how many guys now. The influence of all of these guys that ended up in the wrestling business was as a result of the Funk family. There was Dory Funk Sr., and he and my father were very good friends. Dory Funk Jr. and Terry Funk, and so a lot of guys that came to school there through that influence and meeting them, you know, made their way into professional wrestling. On the team that I played college football with, 2 of my teammates were Tully Blanchard, and you knew him as Tito Santana. His real name is Merced Solis. But the other guys that went to that school and played football at that school, Bruiser Brody, Stan Hansen, oh my gosh, like I said, me and Tito and Blanchard, Barry Windham. I mean, it's just, the list goes on and on. Not only did they become wrestlers, most of those, all of them became stars at some point, but that was the influence for me. So I was that kid who grew up wanting to be like my dad. And I broke into the business in the summer of 1975. Dick Murdoch, and a lot of people don't know Dick, but Dick was a really, really very good wrestler. I mean, a lot of people have said that, you know, he probably should have had a shot at being a world champion. But the thing about Murdoch was that he enjoyed entertaining the other wrestlers as much as he enjoyed entertaining the crowd. I'll give you an example. You know, I'm a brand new guy, you know, so the guy I was supposed to wrestle, you know, the car broke down, something happened, and so Murdoch says, well, I'll go back out and work with the kid. You know, so I'm this young green wrestler, and so we get in the match, and you know, he said, grab a headlock, so I get him in a headlock. So okay, one tackle, drop down, leapfrog, flying head scissors. I'm not Rey Mysterio, you know. And I said, I don't think I can do that, Dick. I said, he said, why? I said, I don't think I can jump that high. So you got to learn sometime, kid. Go! And he shoots me off, and I hit him with a tackle. I'm going, oh my gosh. And then he dropped down, and he leapfrogs me. And now I'm turning around, and I'm squatting down. I'm thinking, I'm going to try to get all I can and get as high as I can. And when I turned around, he was on his knees. And he looked at me and said, you think you can get that high? Oh. Well, now I crack up, you know, I break a smile. He hits me in the gut, grabs me and takes me over, and he says, don't ever laugh in the ring. This is a serious business. That was Dick Murdoch. One night, he's supposed to do a run-in. You know, come in like the cavalry, because, you know, something's happening in the ring. Well, he come running into the ring. Now, when we wrestled, we wore what we called under tights, you know, and then we wore the over tights. Well, he's got the under tights on, but he's got toilet paper hanging out the back of it about 3 feet long, and he's got the other tights in his hand. He comes running to the ring. He starts punching guys. They're going down and down and down. And finally, he kind of sees that. He pulls it up and he goes, no. Then he hits somebody else. Then he realizes he's got the other tights in his hands, and he stops and he puts them on. Yeah, I mean, total cartoon. You want to kill a town? That's a way to do it. But, I mean, that's, I don't know, just sometimes guys would entertain each other that way.
And Dick was a big influence on the way you work, right? I'll tell a little funny story about my good friend Jake the Snake Roberts. Jake was actually usher at my wedding 26 years ago. Jake and I used to travel a lot together. So I got used to Damien, you know, and people say, well, you know, it's a python, it's not poisonous. I'm like, yeah, but it's a 100-pound snake with a mouth like that will gladly bite your butt. But anyway, so I got used to the snake. And this one day we're late going to the town, imagine that, right? And the snake would always try to get out of the bag, So boom, this one time he got out of the bag. So I'm flying down the road and I look in the mirror and there's this giant snake head over my shoulder, you know. So I slam on the brakes, we go sliding into a rest area, a truck stop type thing with all the old timers are out in the rocking chairs, you know, like a Cracker Barrel restaurant. We go sliding in, we open up the back door, Jake and I jump out, we're fighting with a 10-foot snake, stuff it back in the bag and drive off. So you know, to this day, these people are going, you're not going to believe it. These two guys pulled up, and there's a giant snake in their back seat. But then one time we were in Detroit, and we went out. Detroit was a good party town, like Heard.
Yeah, me too.
You wrote the book. But anyway, we went out, we partied, and it was like January. We came back to the hotel, and we went to bed. Next morning, we woke up, there was about 6 inches of snow. So we went, we opened the trunk, there's my 2x4. There's Damien, frozen as stiff as my 2x4. We forgot the snake and left him in the trunk overnight. You know, so Jake had to call Vince. He's like, Vince, the snake's dead. They're like, what happened? You know, I don't know. It just died.
Yeah. Well, you know, here's the truth is, you know, I never liked snakes either. And then I'm having a match with Jake, you know, and of course I had my personal valet, Virgil. Well, Virgil was like, you know, he absolutely no way snakes, not at all. So in this match with Jake, we get to a point where finally, I underhandedly beat him somehow, and then after post-match, he starts kicking my rear end, and I get locked up in the ropes. And he looks at everybody, and he goes and he points to the bag, and everybody's going, yeah, put the snake on him. So he goes and he gets the snake out of the bag, and he starts walking to me. Well, we're just supposed to come in the ring and come up behind him, and right at the last minute, he turns and he puts the snake on Virgil. You know, and when Virgil first said that, that snake, and I don't like snakes either. I said, look, it's been fed, it's not going to bite you. I said, okay, Jake, put the snake around my, so he puts the snake around my neck. I'm like, oh, this slimy, creepy thing, but I did it. I said, okay, look, and so Virgil does it, everything's cool, but in the match, when Jake turned around and put that snake on, Virgil's supposed to just take the snake and hit the mat and just lay there, just screaming and then hollering with the snake laying across him. When he hit the ground, he launched that snake into the air. It went over the top rope into the first row of ringside. Everybody thinks that. What people don't know is that, Damien was, every time Jake, it's like when he would go on tour, somebody would be at the first town and he would get the snake, different snake, and then, he would take it at the end of the tour, they would pick it up and they would start, Jake the snake doesn't like the snake either. So, a lot of snake stories. The ones that got me was when he had the cobra.
Pet Macho.
Oh yeah. Anybody ever see that match where? Oh my gosh. And I don't care. Everybody's got a price, but that's ridiculous. I don't know what they paid me, but it ain't enough.
Well, because we're all in the back, and they bring the cobra in, and like, Macho, we're going to have the cobra bite you, and of course all the other wrestlers are, Jesus, Macho, I don't think they got all the poison out of that snake, bro. Jake likes the rib, there may be just a little poison to it, Macho. Oh. So finally he goes up to Jake before the show, and he's like, Jake, I want the snake to bite you. It's back here, so it shows there's no poison in it. I don't want you to take no pills or nothing. I'm like, no, it's all right, Macho. Finally, back and forth. So finally, Jake's like, well, okay, The cobras, when they don't, like most snakes, just strike. Cobras bite and hold on, so it chews on and lets go. So now when Macho goes to the ring, Jake takes that snake, boom, 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 just whacks the snake about 10 times, so the snake's like, ah! The snake is so pissed. So as soon as they opened the bag, just launched onto Macho and chewing on him forever. But the snakes weren't as durable as the pythons. The cobras wouldn't last as long on the road. He was going through a lot of cobras.
Yeah. Absolutely.
New belt every week. Well, I'll tell you another quick one about the Nasty Boys. Nasty Boys. Nasty Boys are World Tag Team Champions. This is back when everybody was hitting the gym, everybody was on the gas, we're all jacked up. It's all, of course, the Warlord, Barbarian, Road Warriors, everybody's in the gym pushing heavy iron, and we're like in Boston at a big Gold's gym, everybody's dripping, sweating and stuff. The Nasty Boys, they come in, they got their full wrestling gear on, the long coats, they got the World Tag Team belts, the big triple dip ice cream cones. Screw you guys, we're the world champions. Everybody's like, oh.
So there you go. You had an hour of storytelling there. I'm now going to open it up to you guys. So yeah, round of applause, come on. Okay, has anybody got a question? Okay, I'm going to start off this and I'm going to work around it.
Hi Jim, question for both. Ted, how was it working with Sherri? And Jim, how was it working on the other half of it?
With Sherri, Sherri was a tough woman. Back in the day, a lady wrestler was a lady wrestler, Now they're all young divas, It's a different deal, but Sherri was a tough woman. I know one time in particular, when she was managing Macho,
Macho had on me on the mat and had my head sticking outside the ring over the apron. And Sherri was supposed to give me a shot. And so he took the referee, so I'm laying there and waiting because I know it's going to be a good shot. And Sherri swings and she misses. It's just like, now I'm like, well, she's going to overcompensate on the second one. And she's swinging for the fences. Man, she hit me so hard the second time. I got so mad. I rolled in, I grabbed a hold of Macho. He goes, "It wasn't me, Duggan, Sherri did it."
No, Sherri was great. I mean, and what Jim said is true. I mean, it's like, you know, in a business that is dominated by guys, you know, she was, you know, she was as tough as any guy. I mean, and she wouldn't back up from anybody. And but you know what? Absolutely enjoyed every minute. I mean, it was like she wanted so much to get. There were times when I would have to say, too much, you know, too much, Sherri. It was like, save it for the end. But, you know, she was, and she had asked me to induct her in the Hall of Fame, which was, I was honored to do it. And yeah, she was great.
Two questions for you, Ted. Where does Ted Dibiase start and the $1 Million Man start? Or is it all just one person? And as we know, back in the day, the $1 Million Man, it was a 24/7 thing, you never switched off. What was the most expensive stunt you paid, or the WF paid for? Expensive, I mean, money-wise, what was the biggest colossal stunt? You know, the limos, I was at the hotels, I was at car bills.
Well, okay, I was Ted Dibiase, just who I was. The reason that Vince McMahon, the idea, the concept for the $1 Million Man was Vince's personal idea. And, but I think, and he told me, he said he chose me for that because the way I carried myself just as a heel was that way, you know, aloof, talking down to people, you know, and the other thing, you know, in the business, excuse the expression, but, you know, we call it what we call the chicken shit heel, you know, like a bully. He talks real big, and then when he's confronted, he becomes a coward, you know. You never get tired of seeing that guy get his butt kicked. And so that was another aspect of the type of heel I was. And so, I mean, you can imagine that, I mean, the first time he laid this out to me, and again, what Vince McMahon is extremely good at doing is marketing his product. And so, I mean, the limousines, the first class airfare, everywhere I went, they saw the appearance of wealth. And yes, I mean, I carried money in my pocket. I mean, the first day, they counted up $2,000 in brand new $100 bills, and he said, "This is your flash cash." And you know, he said, "Now, if you abuse this, obviously you lose it. But I want you to pick your spots. For example, go in a restaurant. You know, if Virgil would be with me, and I'd get up and announce myself, and I'd go, 'Hey, I'm Ted Dibiase, I'm the $1 Million Man of the WWF. It's your lucky day. I'm picking up your tab.'" And Virgil would go around and pick everybody's tab up, you know, and $400, $500, $600 worth of food, and I'd slap down the $100 bills and get the receipt, go back to the office, and they'd give me more money. You know, talk about social media, that word spread like wildfire, like, oh my gosh, that guy really is rich. You know, they even put me on an episode of Lifestyles of Rich and Famous. It wasn't my house. It was Vince's house. You know, people were, I lived in Mississippi. They go, "Ted, where's that house?" I said, "In Connecticut." You know, but in terms of, you know, when we would do the stunts, the one thing I'm always asked about, the little kid in the basketball. Anytime I did something at a live event, in other words, it wasn't television, those were a shoot. I would literally, after the match was over, I would hand pick somebody, you know, and get them to do something stupid, you know, I'd beat you and go and spit it on the mat and say, "Push that out of the ring with your nose," or something, and I'd give them $300. But on television, everything was, you know, I would give them the money in the arenas. It appeared on television that I would always jilt them out of it. So we're in Milwaukee, and I go, "What can we do tonight?" And then I said, "Well, what's Milwaukee famous for?" And somebody said, "Beer and basketball." I said, well, we can't do the beer, let's do something with a basketball. So that's how the whole idea came. And actually, the little kid it was handpicked, and we rehearsed it. But now when we did it live, I had to be hardcore. So, okay, kid, if you can dribble this ball 15 times, not miss, you got $500. He gets to 14, I stick my foot out, the ball bounces off him. Well, you don't get the job done, you don't get the money. I mean, he's 6 years old, crocodile tears, ran to his mother. I get in the back and everybody's going, yes, yes, yes. I said, I'm glad you're all happy now. Can you get an armored vehicle to get me out of the building? Those people are going to kill me. Of all the things I did, I get asked that more. I got asked so many times. Finally, I said one day, I said, you know, that was 20 years ago. I said, that kid's like 26, 27 years old. He's probably going to walk up one day and pat me on the shoulder in the airport. And it happened. I flew to Omaha, Nebraska. I was renting a car, and I'm looking for, it's like one of those deals where you pick whatever car you want. And so this guy taps me on the shoulder. I turn around and went, he says, Mr. Dibiase, I'm the manager of this car rental. He says, can I help you find a car? I said, yeah, find something that would fit you or me. And so we're looking around. He says, oh yeah. I said, you remember that thing you did with the kid in the basketball? He just had the look on his face. I went, no. He said, yep, it was me. And it gets better. I said, wow, that's great. I said, you're managing this place, you're doing good. So what did you do with yourself? He said, you're going to love this. I went to college on a basketball scholarship. I said, see what I did for you, kid? That's a true story. As far as the most expensive thing ever done, actually, I didn't do it, Vince did it. When they inducted me in the Hall of Fame, Vince always wants to make it entertaining. So he told me, and I was the last one out, and he said, after you finish doing whatever you want, saying whatever you want to say, he says, let's do the gimmick one more time. So I did the deal where, and oh yeah, by the way, before I go, in case you aren't convinced yet that you have a price and you can't be bought, I guess I'm just going to have to prove it one more time. And so I said, okay guys, let the money rain. They did a money drop. Yeah. They dropped $10,000 into the crowd. I wasn't sure what it was. They told me later, but that was obviously. And when I went backstage, Vince looked at me, he shook my hand, he said, great job, kid, but you're still costing me a lot of money.
Got a question here.
I'd just like to say one thing, that Vince got me a 2x4 once.
I've actually got a question for Perry Saturn. Do you still keep in touch with Moppet, or did you split up? No, it's not. It's for Jim, actually. Jim, have you got any British Bulldog stories you could share with us? Because obviously, it's very prominent to Britain.
Well, I didn't really know the Bulldogs that well, of course, but back then, Jake had the snake, Damien Coco had the Frankie the bird, and of course the Bulldogs had Matilda. And Bobby Heenan always used to tell Vince, he goes, Duggan needs an eagle. I'm like, Bobby, shut up, Give me an eagle as a joke, because the worst thing, you'd be walking in at 2 o'clock in the morning, and you see Davy Boy out there with Matilda trying to get her to go to the bathroom. Free, go to the bathroom. I said, I'm glad to carry anything. As long as it's an eater, I have to go to the bathroom. But yeah, I didn't really hang with the Bulldogs that much, tell you the truth. And that's one of the misconceptions, I think, of wrestling, where everybody thinks, well, you guys are really all good friends. Actually, it's a very competitive business. I tell folks there's 1,500 NFL football players, there's 1,000 NBA basketball players, there's maybe 120 wrestlers that make a living in wrestling. It's a very, very competitive business.
Got to run right to the back now.
It's not a question personally for Ted or Hacksaw, but I was just wondering, I've read a lot of stories on the internet about Haku and this macho man, hard man reputation that he's got. Just wondering if there are any instances where both yourselves ever felt threatened that he were, going to come to you or rip your head off as such, or have you got any interesting stories you can share with us?
Well, if Haku or Ming, Tonga Tonga, as he wrestled before, is well known as one of the tougher guys in our business. Of course, in our business, it's a snake pit of tough guys. There's not a whole lot of walk in the park, sitting there in the dressing room. And you know, in Mid-South, if you did lose a bar fight, you would get fired from the company. That was a whole different, and they had a waiver where you think it's fake. You sign a waiver, you come up in the ring, we'll show him it's fake or not, tough guy. But actually, I met Ming in Hawaii, and he helped me out. I was a heel, and of course all the baby faces were island folks, you know, and the Hollies, the white people, were the heels. But long story short, I ran down, I tripped one of the good guys, and there was a wrestling riot. And I had never been in a wrestling riot before, you know, I was right out of the NFL, I thought I was a pretty tough guy, you know. So here comes the people, you know, and we're only in Pearl City, there's probably 100 people there, but, you know, 85 of them are Samoans. And they're coming, so the first big guy, I racked him, I'm like, woo! He goes, woo! I'm like, these usually work. And they were like fire ants, they were all over me. It's the first time and only time I've ever been totally knocked out in my life. The guy had me hooked, the other guy hit me with a chair, and I went down, and they were in a big circle putting the boots to me from the top to the bottom. They were all having like a pinata. And Haku came out, boom, and boom, and dragged me back to the dressing room. And of course, I was the convict with the ears on my mask back then, you know. And so all my buddies, Haku and everybody, they're all looking at me, and they pull the mask off, and they all go, ooh. I'm like, what? Not like the Mona Lisa, but come on. But Haku is known as one of the tougher guys in our business. But I tell you, a true gentleman, and a guy I'm proud to call a very good friend.
And I've been asked that too, like who, you know, it's hard to pick one tough guy. There's a lot of real tough guys in our business, but it's kind of like, you know, where's the 300-pound gorilla sleep? Where he wants to. And there was a fight that broke out in a bar when I wasn't there. I heard the story, but it's like, you know, yeah, it's very competitive, but, you know, like it's also, we're like a family. And if something happens and something gets in, you know, here comes the cavalry, we're gonna get back to back, and we're gonna take on everybody if we have to. It was one of those type of deals where, you know, Haku's throwing bodies left and right, and he didn't start the fight. He just jumped in because one of the guys, you know, got into this thing. So the police come and they handcuffed him. He was handcuffed behind his back, and he snapped a pair of handcuffs. Now, I don't know if anybody here's ever been handcuffed, but to do that is just incredibly strong. And so after he snaps the handcuffs, then they maced him. Well, when they maced him in the eyes, and that got him down. But imagine how strong you have to be to do that. I mean, the guy, and thank goodness, like Jim said, that at his personality, he's one of the nicest, you know, guys you'd ever meet, and he's also a very good friend of mine.
Two things, if that's okay. First of all, I'm a big fan of the Shield, right? So I'd love to know what you think of like each individual. Dean Ambrose is like my favourite of the Shield, so I'd love to know what you think of each individual member of the Shield. And also, as I mentioned to you earlier in the signs, have you got any Rick Martel stories?
I couldn't tell you a thing about the Shield. You know, I had an active wrestling career that spanned 19 years, and then I came back and I was a manager and a commentator for another 6 years, so 25-year wrestling career. And it's kind of like, if you had, you know, there's a show that's real popular on TV in the United States, Dr. Oz. Anybody ever heard of Dr. Oz?
No,
anyway?
I don't.
It's, you know, well, that's the question I said. If you had a 30-year career being a doctor, would you go home every day and watch Dr. Oz? Hell no. So I don't, you know, I go to WrestleMania. I make appearances. When my son was wrestling, I was a little more involved because of him. You know, paying attention to what's going on. But in reality, I'm very busy. You know, I have another vocation in life now. I'm a minister. I travel. I speak. I do events like this as well. but I just, I can't tell you about those guys because I don't really know them.
Okay.
Now, Rick Martel,
Yeah.
he's a great guy. He's a guy that I think he should be in the Hall of Fame. I knew Rick, but there's one guy I never had the opportunity to personally have a match with. It just was one of those things. It never did happen.
Not quite as eloquent as Teddy, but I like to say that'd be like a butcher watching cut meat on his day off. After 35 years of wrestling, the last thing I want to watch is wrestling anymore, so I don't really watch the product that often anymore. But as the model Rick Martel, I always love what a handsome guy. He always look, big white teeth, good body. And of course, we were saying the other day, that whole generation of guys, him, Tony Gurria, that group of guys, they seem to have forgot about in the Hall of Fame. There's a lot of the guys they put in the Hall of Fame, I kind of disagree with them putting in so quick after their career is over. Edge I love, I think is one of the best ever wrestlers there was, is Edge. But little time before you put him in the Hall of Fame, let a little time go by. And of course, we have no control or no say about who they put in the Hall of Fame, but hopefully one day they'll recognize that generation.
This is a question for both of you. As Ted has said, you've got to be 25 years in the business, Jim's got to be 35. But in all that time, what is the worst gimmick you've ever seen?
The worst
gimmick, worst character.
Gobbledygook. Remember that was a Survivor Series. I think it was Hector Guerrero. They dressed up in a turkey outfit and they had the egg set the whole time. Probably Gobbledygook or the Convict.
Now the gobbledygook, the funny thing about that is like, they do this thing and when Hector, and Hector, the Guerreros, all those guys are pretty dang good wrestlers. So they had Hector do this thing, and of course, he ain't real happy about it. But okay, whatever I gotta do. And what happened is he's got this thing on and these eyes things, but so when he walked out on the stage, the spotlight was so bright that when it went into it was like all of a sudden he can't see anything. All he sees is white, and that's why that thing was a failure. The other, did anybody remember this guy? Maybe he was a one-hit wonder, the Matador. The first time he walked through the curtain with that great big bull head, boom, down he went. I said, this is over before it starts. Probably one of the worst. Now, the one that I don't think anybody liked, especially the guy that gave it to, was the Rooster. Terry Taylor's really a pretty dang good wrestler, but that gimmick was, I don't know.
Terry Taylor is like a GQ kind of guy. He's kind of like Ted or Ric Flair. They could be on the road forever. They still had creases in their pants. He was, a handsome guy, but he hated that whole Red Rooster deal. But if you look at another example, was One Man Gang, and they made One Man Gang into Akeem. And Akeem embraced that character and made it work. Where Terry Taylor, he just hated it and never really got into it. I think if Terry had gotten a mohawk and really dyed his hair red and really got into it, it would have worked better. But he hated it so much it didn't work.
You did pretty good, Jim.
Well, it sounds kind of like a ho! Of course, Flair with that woo! I'm like, Rick, are your trunks too tight or what? Woo!
Any more questions? Yeah.
Hi, question for Ted. How much influence did you have on who joined the corporation?
None. I did what I was told. That's like somebody said, oh wow man, we love you, Ted. It's like the one good thing you did is you introduced the Undertaker. It was in the script, I didn't really introduce it. I didn't really manage those guys. I wasn't really their managers. It was all part of the gimmick.
Got time for one more. Okay, maybe two more. We'll go with 3. 3? Any advance on 3?
Hi guys. Obviously you both performed at Summerslam at Wembley. So just wondering what your memories of that event was and your memories of wrestling in the UK in general.
Well, I mean, people will ask me, they'll say, like what was, what was one of your, like your most memorable moment, and when you have a career that's, oh my gosh, 19 active years, 25, years overall, it's hard to pick one event, especially when you wrestle 300 days a year. But one of those events for me was Wembley. That's the largest crowd I ever wrestled in, of 80,000 people. The other thing that's kind of memorable about that, me and Mike Rotunda IRS wrestled Hog and Animal World Tag Team Title match, and a lot of people ask the question, you guys were the World Tag Team Title, well, so why did you guys go on second? And I said, well, the reason is our old buddy Hawk, God bless him. Hawk was one of the greatest guys ever known, but Hawk also went through a period of time, kind of like Jake, where, he got on the drugs, and what happened that day was, I don't know what he took, but Animal came to me and came to Mike, and then we all went to Vince and said, look, Hawk took some pill, and if you don't get him out there quick, he might not be awake for the match. That's why we went on seconds that night. But that was one of the most memorable. Yeah, I've always loved coming here. Absolutely. One of the first things I stop and get when I hit the UK is fish and chips. Can't you tell?
I think what I remember most about Wembley Stadium was, of course, my tag team partners, the Bushwhackers. We did about 20 minutes going, yo, ho, yay, ho. Everybody else is out there drop kicking and beating each other up. We came back, yo, ho. And had a great match. And of course, like Penny says, just coming over, that was a huge deal. I mean, forever, wrestling was just in the States, and all of a sudden we're coming to England, of course, in Wembley Stadium, Royal Albert Hall. I mean, a lot of people would look down and go, oh, you're a wrestler. I said, yeah, we just got finished at Royal Albert Hall. It's always a thrill to come over here, and I tell you, some of the obviously greatest fans in the world, folks. You guys, I think everybody likes to come over.
Hi, I'm Ted. When you were in WCW, you managed Steiners. What was your memories of working with Scott Steiner in particular?
Well, my memories of WCW weren't very good anyway. When I left WWF, I wasn't upset with the company. It was more of a personal thing. I had a life-changing experience right after WrestleMania '92. My first book is about having to come to terms with a lot of the wild living I was doing, confessing all this garbage to my wife, and by the grace of God, was forgiven and given a second chance, and I took that chance and ran with it. So for me, like when I went back to work, when I left after SummerSlam '93, I made a couple tours in Japan, and that's when I herniated the disc in my neck, and now I wasn't wrestling physically anymore, and then I went back as a manager commentator, which did require me to be on the road constantly. And so for me at the time, it's like if I had, alcohol, and if I was an addict, if I was addicted to drugs or booze, stay out of the bar, stay away, So for me, danger was being on the road, because, my attitude about everything had changed, but the atmosphere that I was in overall hadn't changed. So being out there was like, if I'm out there too long, it's going to suck me back in. And so that's really why I went to the other company. But when I went to the other company, it was the most poorly run organization that I'd ever worked for. And initially, Eric Bischoff had brought me in to be like the spokesperson for the NWO. And, I couldn't be the $1 Million Man, Hogan tagged me, Trillionaire Ted, but everybody knew. And but along the way, when he saw how big this thing was getting, because in reality, what became the biggest angle in wrestling was the war between the two companies. And so the ratings for both the shows went through the roof. I mean, we were up there, we were having the same ratings as Monday Night Football, which is a big deal. And so Eric Bischoff decided that I just started noticing that as each week went by, I'm having less and less to say, and he's interjected himself. So I just told him, I said, if you want to have the job, obviously, that you hired me for, great. I said, but I'm not going to go out there and be Virgil every week and just carry Holden's belt. If you don't have anything for me to do, I'm going to go home and collect my check. And so then when you decide what to do with me, I'll come back, and that's what they did. You know, a lot more people were finding out, you know, that I was a Christian. I had been on Christian television. So the whole idea of me, you know, kind of like the thrill is gone, it's like the cat's out of the bag, so let's make him a baby face. And so that's what they did, is they put me with the Steiners. As a team, the guys were great, you know, and you know, Rob's a super guy, and Scott's just, you know, he's got a short fuse, and everybody knows it. There's times when he's really good, there's times when you just don't want to be around the guy, you know, and even his brother, you know, I mean, they don't even talk that much. You know, he's just, I think what's the epitome of roid rage, maybe. So that's that.
Right, one last question. You guys? You sure? Right, one more. Yeah? Okay.
Making me run all the way.
It's a question for both of you. You mentioned before that Big Boss Man. It's a couple of talks we've been to. There's not really been brought up in stories really that much. I was just wondering what kind of character he was in dressing room and during fights.
Boss Man is an extremely talented guy. You know, and I did have a program with him. You know, while he was in WWE, and even before he was the Big Boss Man, you know, when he was Bubba, I didn't have a whole lot of experience with him then. You know, and again, great guy, great worker. I mean, you know, and it's like he knew his gimmick, and he worked the gimmick very well. One funny story about him, you know, when he would come out and get in the ring, and he got to where he could twirl that club. I mean, you know, unbelievable, and just swing it around. So we were wrestling each other. I think it was Montreal, and he got out there. They introduced him. He swung that thing, and that thing took off. I mean, it took off. I mean, it went the ringside. Then there's the first set of risers, and it bounced off of the guardrail on the second set of risers, and like, you know, and he and everybody else watching were kind of holding their breath, because if that thing had hit anybody, you know, unfortunately it did.